Today we're going to talk about British ham radio in World War II. Prior to the Second World War, amateur radio was a popular hobby in Britain. There were nearly 30,000 licensed amateurs with the call sign prefixes 2 and GI. As in most countries, amateurs provided an invaluable communications service during the war effort, acting as volunteer auxiliary stations, relaying official messages, and generally keeping people informed of the latest developments. Even before Britain's entry into the conflict in September 1939, enthusiasts had set up receivers to monitor the airwaves for interesting signals from across the world. Within weeks of the declaration of war, however, all non-military radio stations were shut down by the British government in order to prevent enemy spies from infiltrating the airwaves. For the next 6 years, the only transmissions that could be heard throughout the country were those of the BBC and a handful of other officially sanctioned stations. It was not until May 1945 that amateur radio would be permitted once again. But this was not the end of the story. In fact, it was merely the beginning. As part of a worldwide network, British listeners were able to tap into German military traffic well before the outbreak of hostilities. In particular, radio beacons, such as the German long-wave transatlantic, began broadcasting their signals across the Atlantic. The first person to hear and identify these transmissions was W.W. Dolman, who lived near Rugby. A prominent member of the Radio Society of Great Britain and a former Marconi employee, Dolman was convinced that the signals he picked up were German in origin. When the war began, the British government confirmed his suspicions and put Dolman in charge of monitoring German radio transmissions at a new facility established at his work that led to the creation of Y. Originally located at Bletchley Park in Buckinghamshire, Station X was a top-secret signals, intelligence, intercept, and decryption center tasked with monitoring and analyzing German military communications monitored on medium-wave frequencies. The need for such a facility had become apparent following the remilitarization of the Rhineland in March 1936. At the time, British intelligence believed that another large-scale German offensive was imminent, and that the country's high command would likely use radio to coordinate its forces. While the British had been aware of this for some time, they had yet to establish any means by which to intercept the Germans' communications. With the situation growing increasingly tense, the Air Ministry asked the Post Office Engineering and Wireless Telegraph Construction Company to design a mobile radio monitoring station capable of picking up signals from across Europe. It was originally intended that the system should consist of 3 stations, one in the south of England, one in Scotland, and one in Northern Ireland. Due to the rapid mobilization of the British Army in the early stages of the war, however, the Post Office Wireless Company found it impossible to get hold of enough skilled workers to construct the required equipment. The first and only station was therefore built at Bletchley Park instead, and went into operation on August 5, 1939. In addition to its main site, Bletchley Park, Station X also operated a number of outlying huts and villas in the surrounding area, including the famous Old Palace in nearby Milton Keynes. Over the course of the war, Station X would move from Bletchley Park to various other locations, including Osterley Park House, the National Physical Laboratory at Bushy and Twickenham Studios. The station was run by the Post Office Wireless Telegraph Construction Company under the direction of Major General Sir Thomas S. Bridges. Civilian employees were forbidden from discussing the true purpose of the organization with anyone outside the company and were forced to sign the official Secrets Act upon entering the premises. Military personnel were given similar warnings and told that failure to comply with the regulations would result in summary dismissal and imprisonment. Employees were further instructed to report any suspicious characters to the site security team, many of whom were employed from the special branch of the Metropolitan Police. Staff were also banned from bringing cameras onto the site. making it virtually impossible to tell what was really going on inside. Although some radio operators worked 12-hour shifts at Station X monitoring incoming transmissions, the majority of their time was spent listening for the telltale click of a telegraph key or the modulation of a voice. When a transmission was detected, operators would use a direction finder to pinpoint its origin and pass the details on to the code breakers waiting at their desks. Much of the work done at Station X involved listening to German military communications on frequencies between 4 and 30 MHz. This was made possible by a network of aerials strung around the site's perimeter, each of which consisted of 2 long wires suspended between 2 wooden poles. Although the antennas used at Station X were much smaller than the ones used at civilian radio stations, they were extremely effective at picking up the low-frequency signals broadcast by the German military. One of the most important sources of intelligence gathered at Station X came from German naval units. In the early days of the war, German U-boats were particularly active in the North Sea, and the British were keen to discover their positions at all times. In order to do this, Station X operators listened out for transmissions from the German Navy's U-boat locator network. These signals were normally transmitted in Morse code and gave the location of any submarines that had recently surfaced. In some cases, the transmissions even included information on the submarine's speed and destination. Perhaps the most valuable intelligence intercepted at Station X, however, came from the German High Command. As the war progressed and the Allies advanced through France and Belgium, the Germans became increasingly reliant on radio to coordinate their forces. Unfortunately for the Axis powers, most of their High Command's communications were passed in clear, meaning they were unencrypted and could be deciphered by the British. This proved to be an invaluable source of intelligence for the Allies, and helped them to keep one step ahead of the Germans throughout the conflict. While it is true that some German communications were encrypted using the Enigma machine, this was not always the case. Many lower-level units were not equipped with the complex encryption technology and simply transmitted their orders in plain text. Furthermore, even when higher commands did encrypt their messages, mistakes sometimes happened. Human error meant that the odd letter or number was often transposed or omitted, allowing the British codebreakers at Station X to gain an almost complete understanding of German battle plans. By 1944, in fact, over 70% of German military communications being intercepted at Station X were It was not just German communications that were monitored by Station X, however. In 1942, the British government ordered the Post Office Wireless Company to design a receiver capable of picking up signals from Japan. This was in response to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and was part of a wider effort to monitor enemy shipping lanes in the Pacific. The last 6 years of war had seen the British public endure everything from food shortages to the Blitz. Throughout it all, however, the vast majority of people had never been allowed to switch on their radios. Listening to the wireless had been banned by the government in order to prevent enemy spies from infiltrating the airwaves, and only a handful of specially selected radio amateurs had been granted permission to do so. Now, at long last, that was about to change. On May 8, 1945, at 2:42 p.m., the BBC announced that Germany had surrendered unconditionally to the Allies. Just over a week later, the British government announced that radio would be permitted once again, and that civilian stations would be allowed to resume broadcasting on May 22nd. The first program aired that day was a speech from Prime Minister Winston Churchill, in which he expressed his joy at the end of hostilities in Europe. That evening, the BBC broadcast a special program to mark the occasion, which included readings from Shakespeare's Richard III and a performance of Land and Hope and Glory by the BBC Symphony Orchestra. Over the next few weeks, the corporation introduced a series of new programs designed to help people across Britain readjust to civilian life after 6 years of war. Among the most popular were talks on topics such as gardening and domestic science, as well as light entertainment shows featuring some of the biggest stars of the day. A lot of information regarding Station X and its role in the war effort was not declassified until relatively recently. Much of what we know today, therefore, has come from interviews with former employees conducted by the BBC and private historians. This has led to some controversy, as many of those involved have understandably been reluctant to reveal sensitive information about their work during the war. Nonetheless, thanks to their efforts, as well as the release of government documents, we now know quite a bit about this secretive organization and the vital role it played in winning the war. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like, share and subscribe for more content.